Research has found that people's heartbeats synchronize when they're captivated by the same story. Having evolved with storytelling as a means to pass information across generations, our brains are powerfully attuned to narratives, so much so that we can recall well-told stories better than basic facts. Stories play a powerful role in shaping the world we've created for ourselves, and it turns out that they may even be able to dictate the rhythm of our own heartbeats. An initial study looking at what happens to our bodies as we listen to these tales and pay attention found that our heart starts beating in unison even if we're miles away from each other. Lucas Para tweets, "Your heart rate fluctuates naturally when you are just sitting there doing nothing, maybe listening to a story on the radio, but guess what? You're not all alone. Someone else listening to the same story will have the same heart fluctuation as you," they said. "Why does our heart rate go up and down like that?" asked study co-author and biomedical engineer Lucas Para on Twitter. He says, "We think it's because you need to be ready to act at a moment's notice, and for that you need to know what's going on around you. In other words, you need to be conscious of what is happening, even if it's just a story." Kindly support my Patreon account since YouTube has again demonetized my YouTube channel. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below. Paris Brain Institute neuroscientist Pauline Perez and colleagues monitored volunteers' heart rates during a series of experiments using an electrocardiogram and listening to a 1-minute snippet of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea in one experiment, or a few minutes of instructional videos in another. Heart rates were seen to synchronize between study participants regardless of where they were. The instructional video showed this phenomenon was not tied with emotion, which is something previous studies have theorized after observing this synchrony in people watching the same movie. But disrupting the volunteers' concentration by making them count backwards or subjecting them to distracting sounds diminished their heart synchronicity and their ability to recall the narrative as well. Memory retention has been shown to align with conscious perception, so this suggests our hearts play a beat in time with our mind's conscious processing of the narrative. The researchers say what's important is that the listener is paying attention to the actions in the story. This is what Paris Brain Institute neurologist Jacobo Sitt says. He says it's not about emotions, but about being engaged and attentive and thinking about what will happen next. Your heart responds to those signals from the brain. And in a final experiment, the researchers even tested this on 19 unconscious patients along with 24 healthy volunteers. As predicted, most of the patients failed to synchronize in their heart rates, all except for 2. One of these went on to regain full consciousness. The team writes in their paper, "These results suggest that the patient's synchronized heartbeats might carry prognostic information with a specific emphasis on conscious verbal processing." Aside from the changes from physical activity and other stressors, the rhythms of our hearts fluctuate naturally all the time. This has been attributed to autonomic processes, the automatic, unconscious parts of our body's regulation, but this study shows conscious processes also play a role. There's a lot of literature demonstrating that people synchronize their physiology with each other, but the premise is that somehow you're interacting and physically present in the same place. Paris says, "What we have found is that the phenomenon is much broader and that simply following a story and processing stimulus will cause similar fluctuations in people's heart rates. It's a cognitive function that drives your heart rate up or down." Perez and team suspect that individual words as well as overall meaning of the narrative and emotions they inspire drive the synchronicity, And they note a cohesive narrative is crucial to create synchronized activity in the brain scans. But they say that we have to be careful. This is not a very small study, with each of the experiments consisting of, this is a very small study. The subjects were only 20 to 30 each time, so the results will need to be verified with larger groups of people. Comparisons with brain scans could possibly help determine if narratives are indeed the cause of heartbeat synchronicity as well. Neuroscience is opening up in terms of thinking of the brain as part of an actual anatomical physical body, of course. Paris says this research is a step in the direction of looking at the brain-body connection more broadly in terms of how the brain, of course, affects the body. People think they react to the world in their particular way, adds biomedical engineer Jens Madsen from City College, New York. But he says, but even our hearts react in a very similar way when we listen to short stories. That makes me smile because we're all human, he says. This was published in the journal Cell Reports, and it's on Science Alert by Tessa Komunduru. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support.